clarifying complex and technical material through legal analysis. One Saturday morning, Sarah was teaching a pre-licensing class on Arizona agency law. As she explained a section of the Arizona Revised Statutes, she noticed something she had seen before. Students were writing, heads were nodding, but their eyes told a different story. They were hearing the words. They weren't understanding the meaning. Sarah paused in the middle of the lesson. She looked at the class and smiled. "Let me ask you a question. If your best friend asked you to explain this law over lunch, would you read the statute to them?" The class laughed. "Probably not." "Then let's stop teaching the statute for a minute," she said. "Let's teach what it actually means." After class, David smiled. "You've learned one of the hardest lessons in education." Sarah nodded. "I finally realized students aren't struggling because the law is difficult. They're struggling because I'm introducing the law before giving it meaning." That observation changed the way Sarah taught every legal topic from that day forward. Real estate instructors frequently teach subjects filled with legal terminology, administrative rules, contracts, disclosures, and court decisions. While these topics are essential to professional practice, they can become overwhelming when presented exactly as they appear in statutes or legal publications. Students often assume the law is far more complicated than it really is, simply because of the language used to express it. Great instructors bridge that gap. Rather than beginning with pages of statutory language, they begin with a real-life situation students can immediately understand. Once students understand the problem, the law becomes the solution, instead of another paragraph to memorize. David often compared legal instruction to assembling a house. "You don't start with the roof," he said. "You build the foundation first." The same principle applies when teaching Arizona real estate law. Instead of presenting an entire statute at once, experienced instructors break complicated topics into smaller, manageable pieces. They explain one concept, confirm understanding, connect it to a practical example, and then move to the next idea. By the end of the lesson, students understand not only the individual pieces, but also how those pieces work together. Sarah began using this approach when teaching disclosure requirements. Rather than displaying the entire statute on the screen, she introduced a simple scenario involving a seller who discovered foundation movement after listing a property. She asked the class, "What would you do if you represented the seller?" Students immediately began discussing honesty, disclosure, inspections, and protecting the buyer. Only after that conversation did Sarah introduce the applicable Arizona law. It answered a question students already cared about. Case studies soon became one of Sarah's favorite instructional tools. Real Arizona court decisions, ADRE disciplinary cases, and transaction scenarios gave students an opportunity to analyze facts before discussing the legal outcome. Instead of simply telling students what happened, she encouraged them to think like licensees. What would you advise your client? What risk do you see? What could have prevented this complaint? Those discussions developed something far more valuable than memorization. They developed judgment. David reminded Sarah that instructors should also understand the difference between explaining the law and providing legal advice. Our responsibility, he explained, is to educate, not to practice law. When students asked questions involving unique legal disputes or situations requiring legal interpretation, Sarah learned to explain the applicable principles while encouraging students or their clients to seek appropriate legal counsel whenever necessary. That distinction protected both the instructor and the integrity of the educational process. Another strategy that transformed Sarah's teaching was incorporating actual Arizona contracts and forms into her lessons. Students often become overwhelmed when discussing legal principles in the abstract. However, when they could see exactly where a disclosure appeared in a purchase contract or identify a contingency within a real form, those same concepts became much easier to understand. Forms gave students a visual connection between classroom instruction and everyday real estate practice. Throughout every lesson, Sarah remained careful not to overwhelm students with too much information at once. Early in her teaching career, she believed more information created better education. Now she knew better. Students don't need every legal exception during the first explanation. They need a solid understanding of the fundamental principle before exploring more advanced applications. By building knowledge one step at a time, confidence naturally increased alongside understanding. Near the end of another successful class, one student raised a hand. "I used to think real estate law was impossible to understand," he admitted. "What changed?" Sarah asked. "You stopped teaching me what the law said. You taught me why it mattered." As students packed their materials, David quietly smiled. "They're no longer memorizing statutes," Sarah nodded. "They're learning how to think." That is the true goal of legal instruction. Real estate instructors are not simply preparing students to pass examinations. They are preparing professionals to make informed decisions, recognize legal issues, protect consumers, and confidently apply Arizona law throughout their careers. When instructors simplify complex material without oversimplifying the law, use practical examples instead of lengthy lectures, and encourage students to analyze situations instead of merely memorizing answers, technical education becomes understandable, meaningful, and memorable. Instructor tip: before introducing any statute, ask yourself, what real-world problem does this law solve? Begin with the problem, then introduce the law. Students will understand and remember both much more effectively. Online discussion question 1. Why do many students struggle when learning legal concepts? Answer: students often become overwhelmed by legal terminology before they understand the practical purpose behind the law. Beginning with realistic scenarios, simple explanations, and practical applications helps students understand why the law exists before examining the legal language itself. Question 2. How can case studies improve the teaching of Arizona real estate law? Answer: case studies encourage students to analyze facts, identify legal issues, discuss possible solutions, and apply statutes to realistic situations. This process develops critical thinking and helps students prepare for situations they may encounter during their careers. Question 3. Why is it important for instructors to distinguish between education and legal advice? Answer: instructors are responsible for explaining legal principles and helping students understand Arizona real estate law. They should avoid giving legal advice on specific disputes or situations that require legal interpretation, and instead encourage students or clients to seek qualified legal counsel when appropriate.